If he didn't say it, he'd probably explode. Curtis Wright is on the beat now.
7:05, hour number 2. Sun's up across southeastern North Carolina. It's going to be a beautiful day. You be safe traveling in and out and around our area, and keep it tuned here on the new 106.7 FM My Talker Radio. You're on the beat. We have a new segment on Mondays that we're going to bring to you, 7 to 7:30 on Mondays, and it's called Cape Fear Capital Connections. And we're honored to welcome to the set and welcome to the show for this segment who's going to be a co-host, capital markets expert, and extensive background in raising capital for technology companies, and a lot more than that. I'll let him introduce himself, and that's Thomas Foss. Good morning, sir.
Thank you, Curtis. I appreciate being able to be on your program with you.
And I'm glad you're here. Now, I'm going to let you introduce yourself to the folks because I could probably spend 3 days going over your background. You've had an extensive background in both in investment, raising capital for companies, technology companies, watching companies grow, and studying this entire process and how it's all evolving across the country, so especially here in the East as well.
Well, I'm primarily a regional economist, Curtis, and I study the relationship between capital markets and investment in technology and regional economic growth. So I'm very interested in how a investment creates jobs and creates economic growth in a particular area. And I happen to believe that a lot of that occurs in metropolitan regions. So a lot of what I've done in my life has been writing about that and kind of advocating how we should, as a policy in North Carolina and also in the United States, as a policy, how we should increase the rate of capital investment in technology, and that would create an awful lot of jobs and economic growth.
You know, we have discussed on this program for years, it's been sort of a centerpiece of my program, what's called economic and business development, which means pretty much everything but, you know, bringing in a group of people to clean the kitchen and the toilet. I mean, government, as far as I'm concerned, is too involved. I think the free market and the open marketplace does a better job. First of all, I think the people are much more experienced and knowledgeable about what, you know, is something to pursue that could end up building a company or end it, you know, in the result of having a company and then growing from there and hiring people and making the economy a better place. But it's so crazy between the incentives, between government intervention, government interference, unnecessary regulation, and everybody's going back and forth. But the bottom line is, for me, it's just like sweep out the house and just let the folks who build and create companies, I should say, and build companies, let the free market do what it does.
Absolutely right. It's an odd confluence between government elites who want to make decisions and be involved, as we've got with industrial recruitment incentives, and a little bit of crony capitalism where the companies, the large companies in industrial recruitment, know how to play the game, and they play states and cities off against each other. A lot better approach to economic development would be to invest in our own companies, our own technology companies, invest in our own regions, allow the free market to work, allow entrepreneurs the greatest possibility of freedom to create prosperity. That would be a lot better. These, just as you're talking about this industrial recruitment incentives and what have you, we would be so much better off if we had taken the $300 million for Dell, for example, and instead of giving that to Dell up in Winston-Salem, if we'd invested that in the small technology companies in the Triad, that would have been a lot better idea.
Well, and the Republicans, as you see, their idea is, well, if we reduce burdens on everybody, then we're going to have more economic growth. And the reason is because you don't, it's just like, well, it's not just like being in your garden, but it's like many things in life. You don't know what's going to take off and take root and take seed, and you don't know what's going to grow a lot of times. And, you know, with ideas, how many times have you and I heard, you know, some of the greatest ideas have never seen the light of day, and then others have seen the light of day and they grow. So it is kind of convoluted in my mind to think that you can, you know, the wording is pick winners and losers, but I'm more like picking which seeds are going to grow and which ones aren't, the better chance is to just let them all grow, see if they can grow or have the opportunity to grow.
Well, what we need to do is focus on future markets and try to invest today, capital today, to create new future markets. That creates something that economists call inter-industry effects, or you might know that as supply chain effects. And you really can't tell in technology innovation where that's going to go, where the new markets are going to emerge. We do know from a technological obsolescence point of view that when you make investments, that there's as many new connections that occur in the economy as connections that are obsolete, that go out of business. So one of the things that we've got to do is to recognize that our free market system is a dynamic market, and you've got to invest, you've got to create new markets, you've got to create new opportunities, and it's the growth in the new opportunities that allows individuals to get new jobs, good paying jobs, high wage jobs, stable jobs, so that they're not always on a treadmill.
And that word you use, dynamic, that's perfect, because it is dynamic. What may be today is not tomorrow. And that's the exciting thing, but that is also what makes the free market the best system, I believe, in the history of mankind, because it's constantly responding, it's constantly, evolving, and in all of that there are checks and balances as well. Not to go off on it. When there's government invention and government money, it seems like, well, you can go way down the road, go around the corner, go to the next state before you realize, oops, that was the wrong way to go, right? But that doesn't happen in the free market. You pretty much have those checkpoints, if you will, where if this is something that is going to be profitable, if this is something that's going to grow, well, then it will continue to evolve and continue to go forward.
The economists, the point that you're making, the economists have a concept called the opportunity cost of capital, which means that if you make a certain investment in one sector, for example, if the government decides that they're going to do $300 million with Dell, that forecloses certain opportunities in Forsyth County. And it is extremely hard to overcome those mistakes when government intervenes. It's so much better if you allow the free market system to make the investments, to allow the entrepreneurs to make the investments, because that creates so much more growth and job creation.
Now talk to the folks, and we're going to continue, of course. We have much more to talk about today in our first segment here. But the difference between venture capital and what your vision is of capital investment, capital markets, coming from almost within, if you will.
There is an important infrastructure. Let's just say that you're the mayor of Wilmington and you know that roads and bridges and sewer lines are an infrastructure for growth in neighborhoods and what have you. In Wilmington, there's another type of infrastructure that we have to promote, and that's the capital market infrastructure. That's opportunities for people to invest so that they can find investments. That's opportunities for innovation to occur. It's an infrastructure, capital market infrastructure. So, for example, in southeastern North Carolina, what we need to have is a capital market. We need to have a small mini market, a kind of a stock market. And the stock market in southeastern North Carolina would allow securities to be issued. That's what we've got to do. We've got to issue securities. We've got to allow entrepreneurs to obtain capital. We've got to connect, and this is part of our program today, Cape Fear Capital Connections. We've got to connect companies that need capital, not just new companies, but established manufacturing companies that need $1 million, $2 million, not a lot of money, but it means the world to those small established manufacturing companies. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to create the infrastructure.
And the difference here, correct me if I'm wrong, between this so-called, because I've been involved with venture capital, is what you're talking about, your vision of capital connections and capital investment is long-term. And that long-term view gives you what people call sustainable jobs and sustainable growth, not those spikes, got mine, now I'm out of here kind of thing that you see on the venture side, right?
That's correct, exactly right. The venture capitalists have their own financial perspective, and I don't begrudge them at all for making a lot of money. But the fact of the matter is that from an economic growth and community development point of view, their interests are different than the interests of the community.
We'll be right back. We're here with Thomas E. Voss. He is, again, a capital markets expert, an investment expert, and we're going to be looking at this over the next couple months with our new segment called Cape Fear Capital Connections. On the beat, I'm Curtis Wright.
I got to get to the IRS. You're saying no corruption? None.
No. Not even a smidgen of corruption.
Curtis Wright, the new 106.7 My Talker Radio.
We're back live here on the beat. Our new segment, a special segment called Cape Fear Capital Connections with Thomas Voss. You spoke earlier, Thomas, about infrastructure, capital infrastructure. And, just like I have preached for years that, I guess because I come from the private sector, the job of government should be make sure that we have a good community college where kids can go to school, they can interact, and I wish the community colleges were even more. This one here, Cape Fear Community, is very much involved with the market, if you will, what's going on in the market, and very much attuned through partnerships about what the need is for training and experience and skills. You do that. Make sure that's there. Make sure our public schools are educating kids. We don't need kids with a 53% proficiency level, which we have. Make sure our roads and our other physical infrastructure is in good shape so that if I do want to start a company or I want to bring a company here, I don't have to go, oh my gosh, next year my taxes could double. The year after that, they might stay the same. The next year they might go up 20% or whatever. That there's reasonable understanding and stability and quality of infrastructure and the cost of infrastructure. But see, that's what I believe government should be doing, and they should be at the table saying, okay, guys, you're the knowledgeable people in the marketplace. You're the people in the free market. You're the ones driving it through innovation and growth. Tell me what we need to do on the government side to support it. Not drive the bus, but to support it. See, that's how I look at it.
Precisely.
But it's upside down the other way.
I think it's precisely the case. You've got it exactly right. There's social infrastructure like education, schools, and then there's physical infrastructure.
Well, look at Wilmington right now. I just looked up again. 2 websites in the last 2 weeks are putting us at the bottom of the list in North Carolina. One of them, we weren't even on the list, for safe cities. You can't have that and hope to see the free market or the economic climate grow and expand, because people are going to be worried about bringing companies here. They're going to be worried about living here, right?
Part of the infrastructure that we're talking about is a community allegiance to the rule of law, and you're absolutely right. If there's no trust in the marketplace, if there's no allegiance to the rule of law, and you have violence and civil unrest, then capital markets don't work, because the entrepreneurs and the investors look 5 years and 10 years down the road to be paid. And if you have a lot of civil violence and problems like Wilmington might have, there's no opportunity, there's no trust, there's no confidence that they're actually going to be repaid. But I want to go back to this issue that you were raising. Education in schools is a type of government infrastructure that government can do. And the private sector, charter schools and what have you, they can do part of that too. That's good infrastructure. If you look at the infrastructure that I'm interested in, which is capital market infrastructure, it's easy enough to visualize the market as the supply of capital, which are investment banks, commercial banks, venture capitalists, angels, wealthy folks, that kind of thing, and the demand for capital, which is new companies, existing companies, and then there's a huge, huge market of intermediaries, professional intermediaries, the CPAs, the attorneys, and what have you. That's the market that we need to focus on in southeastern North Carolina. We need to do everything that we can in southeastern North Carolina to create the capital market infrastructure and increase the rate of capital investment in North Carolina companies.
If it's working, and maybe it's, to me, I've kind of visioned things. I'm a visual guy, so I look at it as like a 3-legged stool. If government's doing its job over here with its responsibilities, and it's a healthy community, let's just put it that way. Good schools, good roads, reasonable taxes, reasonable understanding of what can be expected, and that there's a quality of life. In our case, add to it where we live, our environment. Over here on the other side, you've got the the situation of the capital people, the people that are looking that are in the marketplace, and if they feel good about that, then you've got that third leg of the stool, which is, I guess it would be that the marketplace opportunities. If it's all working together, it's working back and forth. Everything's working back and forth. You're going to see this thing grow.
Absolutely right.
And when we interject these things like or incentives, or we interject kind of, I don't know, I call them perversions in the marketplace. They're short term. Right? They're short term. We want something, we want to create that environment of everybody doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And then people go, hey, wow, I feel so good. I might want to own one business, but I'm going to make available capital or get involved to make capital available for somebody else's business to start, right?
Precisely the case. And when the government intervenes, as they did in the Dell case, and Dell leaves, Dell stayed in North Carolina for 6 years, and Dell left. That caused an awful lot of economic disruption up in Forsyth County when the big corporations come here and then they shut down and they leave. Our economy is weaker than it should have been if the government hadn't gotten involved.
Well, you're an investment professional. I was an investment professional. What do we tell our people? Diversify, diversify. Because if you put everything in all your eggs in one basket, you're going to come up short. There's going to be a problem. Whereas you have a healthy, diversified capital markets, and your private markets is working well, your private sector, then when things go up and down like they always will, you're able to ride that wave, right?
Precisely. And right now, what we've got in North Carolina is something that I call the North Carolina capital gap. We've got a capital investment gap because we haven't invested for 10 years. And as a result of not making the level of investments in North Carolina companies that we needed to make, our state median household income has declined about 10% in 10 years. Our income for North Carolina families is going down, and the reason it's going down is that the North Carolina economy is not growing, and families are suffering, and we can create a lot better prosperity for North Carolina families if we start making the investment. But we're way, way behind the 8 ball right now.
And that capital gap, as you call it, which is really that capital infrastructure which you talked about earlier, if it were there, or it's being, if right now we were spending more time on that, then as opportunities come up, and we don't know where they're going to come from, they can come from anywhere.
That's right. Yes.
We can take advantage of those. But how many opportunities aren't we able to take advantage of because we don't have that capital available?
It's precisely the case. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of companies that exist right now in southeastern North Carolina. Hundreds of manufacturing technology companies, terrific companies, biotech companies, lumber companies, wood product companies, lots and lots of technology companies. If we could just get those existing North Carolina companies capital, $1 million, they would create hundreds of jobs, and the jobs would stay here. But we've got to do something to overcome the capital gap. We're way behind. It takes 3 years from the moment that a company makes an investment. It takes 3 years for the effects of that to be felt within the company, and another 3 years for the inter-industry effects, the income and employment multiplier effects to take place. It doesn't happen instantaneously. We're way behind the 8 ball in southeastern North Carolina.
And you and I were sharing the other day, or you were sharing with me, the percentage of those new job creations coming from this type of approach. It's massive. It's 65, 75, whatever percent. It's massive. And one of the things, of course, you've heard me talk about probably is the film industry. The film industry is, for those people who think it's so great, well, it's a come and go. It's a hit and then leave. Whereas if we had capital available, we could have production here, post-production here, large production companies here. What we have here really is just a segment, and actually it's the segment that produces the lowest incomes is here.
Right.
Whereas if we were doing it the way, or with a vision that you're talking about, we could develop that whole, and that creates permanent jobs here.
What we've got to do is we've got to have a new piece of legislation called the North Carolina Small Business Capital Investment Act, and I'd like to talk about that next week.
Yes, that's where we're going to go next week. The capital market and this Small Business Capital Act that's in South Carolina. You're going to talk to us about that and a vision for North Carolina. Thomas Voss. And don't forget to follow us. We are now on Facebook, where you can interact with Thomas and ask questions, propose questions, and link information there at our Facebook page. That's Cape Fear Capital Connections. And join us on Twitter as well. Thank you, Thomas, and I'll see you next week.
Great. Thanks, Curtis.
When we come back, Representative Chris Millis is with us. He's on his way back to the State House. Lots of news here on The Beat.